Reaches, oh, that ball's out, that's live! Back the other way, Sam Hubbard! The Cincinnati Kid! Hubbard's got a convoy! Chased by Andrews! At the 30, the 20, he will score!
To the end zone, down the field, and it is deflected, and gone! Touchdown! A.J. Green!
Goes back to throw. Men are coming late. Looks right down the middle. There's Eddie Brown. He has it at the 35 to the 30. He may go 10-5. Touchdown.
Now the Bengals Super Bowl chances rest on his right foot. The kick is up.
Yeah.
It is good.
Corey Dillon, he's gone. The knockout punch, you're looking at it. 65 yards.
And they're back to throw as the blitz is on. Goes long, intended for Collinsworth. He has it down to the 20. Touchdown. And Chris Collinsworth.
Throwing the long ball. Deep down the field. Chad Johnson's got it. Touchdown. Cincinnati.
Look at Chase go! Oh my goodness, what a gear he just found! Chase for the touchdown! Wow, Chase is on the case!
It is no fluke. It is a fact. The Cincinnati Bengals are headed to Super Bowl 56. The play clock at 3. Shotgun snap. Carr throws into traffic. Intercepted. Jermaine Pratt has the football.
Yeah.
Coffin nails.
Bam, bam, bam! How about that?
Chatterbox Bengals back so soon. 3 days in a row. Bengals eliminated from the playoffs yesterday, but you guys can't get rid of us just yet. Big news this morning as we were live with Dialed In right before the start of Off the Bench. The Bengals fired 4 coaches, including defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. I know that was a topic of conversation early in the year. Towards the end and following the win streak, Bengals fans less sure that the organization was going to make a move, but a big break from organizational norms here, firing Lou Anarumo with a couple years left on his contract. Going to make a change at one of the 3 big coaching positions after the defense really held the Bengals back this year. I'm overjoyed that the Bengals are making changes this quickly after an upsetting season. I wasn't so convinced that Mike Brown and company was going to be committed to making the changes necessary to bring the Bengals back to the mountaintop, but it certainly seems like they are. Craig, back and better than ever. Thanks for joining me on such short notice.
Well, I don't know about all that, but back for sure. Better than ever. We'll see. Look, the news was surprising to me. I'm going to be honest with you. I got up this morning, got my shower and got ready for the day, and got on my phone for the first time for the day. Half an hour or so after the news broke, and open X.com, and the first things that you see are, that Lou Anarumo has been fired, and then obviously the subsequent notes that they made other changes as well. And look, I think we talked about it enough over the last couple of days that these moves were, while surprising due to the Bengals organization and their history, certainly warranted. And I think ultimately we talked about there's got to be accountability on this staff after really a lost season with one of, if not the best quarterbacks in the league, one of, if not the best wide receivers in the league, and the top sack guy in the league as well.
Yeah.
For that season to end at 9-8 without a playoff push had to be accountability. And having worked in athletics for 15 years, it's never an easy decision. It's never an easy conversation. But at the end of the day, this was something that had to happen for these Bengals to move forward. And many of these guys will be well respected and will be a hot commodity on the market. So, the good news is that most of them will find jobs quickly, I would expect.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a optimistic time, I guess, for Bengals fans, given the disappointment of yesterday to now come to today and have these moves and what they mean for the future of this Bengals team.
The biggest thing Bengals fans have been struggling with, I feel like, all year is they have the ability to recognize the problems. This is a smart fan base. This is a fan base who's very involved in the team and roster construction, and they know what's wrong with the team. And they've recognized roster construction errors, coaching mistakes, and the issue that many of us, myself included, have had is, will the Bengals front office be willing to make the changes we all know are necessary to compete? And I've said time and time again that step one of that would be cutting some guys that we wouldn't normally see the Bengals cut, but they messed up my timeline here. They fired Lou less than 24 hours after being eliminated from the playoffs, but this is exactly what I wanted to see. And I'm obviously not rooting for guys to lose their job. Lou Anarumo did a fine job in Cincinnati. He led us to a Super Bowl. The defense played very, very well in that stretch, and an AFC championship. None of that would be possible without him. And he really was crucial to all of that, and I obviously wish him the best. He's one of those guys, as Craig just said, I fully expect to get hired almost instantaneously. I think he's going to be towards the top of defensive coordinator rankings as they're going through interview processes this offseason. I just think his time had run its course in Cincinnati. Not only have we seen underperforming defenses in 6 years, only one defense above the top half in the league. He had a 6th-ranked defense in 2022. Everything other than that below 16th. It's been enough in the must-have moments, at least in 2 years. But Lou Anarumo, I think, was a little bit romanticized about his time in Cincinnati. We even said it on Off the Bench this morning that he's a scapegoat for this Bengals organization. But when you look at these stats, maybe he's not. Not only has he had subpar defenses during his time in Cincinnati, at least in terms of a season-long ranking, but he hasn't really developed anyone either. A lot of the young players that the Bengals have invested draft capital and money into on the free agency and draft and that defensive side of the football, Lou's kept them exactly where they've been. We haven't seen young guys play meaningful snaps. We haven't seen them progress. 8 of the last 10 top 100 picks for the Bengals have been on the defensive side of the football, and we don't really have any cornerstones on that side to rely on. Trey Hendrickson, a guy that we signed in free agency that's really come into his own as one of the best edge rushers in Cincinnati, or in the league during his time in Cincinnati, but he's 30-plus years old. There's not a lot of young players on this defense that we're excited at, and I think that is a big reason why Lou Anarumo was let go.
Yeah, whether you want to talk about Lou or Marion Hobby or others, I think one of the things that did this defensive staff in the end was, being loyal to a fault. Ultimately, this defensive staff relied on veterans who had earned spots on this roster, but quite frankly did not show early on in the season an ability to play at the level that was necessary in order for this defense to be successful. You talk about guys like Sam Hubbard and Von Bell, who were expected to be kind of cornerstones of this defense and are, quote unquote, Lou Anarumo guys. But ultimately, the performance didn't match the expectations. And unfortunately for this Bengals defense, they waited until like week 11 or 12, really, before they started to plug in some of the younger guys. And the Bengals defense certainly improved over the last 5, 6, 7, even 8 weeks. But it was too little too late. And I think ultimately what it came down to was Lou Anarumo was loyal to a fault. And for guys like Sam Hubbard, who had been injured literally the entire season without finding his way onto the injured list somehow, for guys who like Von Bell, who showed on tape week in and week out that he was way too slow to continue to be your starting safety, and that he lacked the recognition in order to make the plays necessary. But they continued to trot those guys out. And, I certainly hate to at this point in the season to be focused on individuals on the team. But the truth of the matter is that there are certain guys who continue to get reps that didn't deserve them at the level that they were getting them. Right. And ultimately for Lou, despite how the last 5 weeks went for this defense, it was just too little too late, and the writing was on the wall, and the move had to be made at this point.
I think those last 5 weeks, though, in the moment, and we even discussed it on post-game shows and throughout the week, that we thought maybe Lou Anarumo was scratching and clawing to keep his job with the performance and the improvement over the last couple weeks. But looking back on it, obviously hindsight's 2020, I think that might have been what did him in. The young guys that he was so stubborn to put in really succeeding out there, at least at a level higher than the guys that he was loyal to. And when all the leaders of the team said he dumbed down his defensive formula and dumbed down the system a little bit, made the calls a lot simpler, they all played a lot better. And I think that shows that not only was he loyal to a fault, but he was stubborn in his system that had worked for him in the past, and we just didn't have the bodies to run it. It's a little different when you have Geno Stone and Jordan Battle in your back end rather than a prime Von Bell and a prime Jesse Bates. This is a completely different roster, a completely different makeup. If Lou has stars, he can be great. I think we saw this year, and I guess last year as well, when you don't have those stars, he starts to struggle a little bit because his system really, really requires guys to do their job. And that sounds simple, and it sounds like something that every system would require, but Lou's unique in terms of the trust he puts in his guys in one-on-one coverage, solo on the back end, having a single edge rusher try to create a lot of pressure and do it all on his own with pure skill. And I think when the Bengals don't have those pieces, it really came back to bite Lou, and that's why we see him leaving. But he'll be hired very, very quickly, and I think he's going to succeed wherever he goes, or I would at least put money on it. And I would be careful as Bengals fans to really have a quick reaction to that, because I think his message ran stale in Cincinnati, at least with the pieces we had, with the leadership we had, and it was time to move on.
What I would say, and to your point, is that Lou Anarumo's defense put the pressure on the individuals to make the plays. And
Correct.
we talked about it all season long about how bad at tackling this team really ended up being, and the missed tackles that happened. And certain players wanted to say that missed tackles weren't a problem, but when you look at the stats, they were. And ultimately, from Lou Anarumo's perspective, if you have guys who are consistently missing tackles, even if they're in the right position, there's not a whole lot more that Lou can do. So you simplify the defense and you allow them to kind of fly to the ball a little bit more. And ultimately, it led to being beat deep on a number of plays over the last several weeks. But it also led to them, tackling a little bit better and blocking up some of those long runs that were happening early in the year and some of these other things that kind of beat the Bengals defense over and over. So, from my perspective, I think when you look at some of the best defenses around the league, ultimately what defines them is their swarming, and the fact that when a ball carrier is tackled, they're tackled by 5-6 guys all around the ball at the same time, versus right now the Bengals defense oftentimes are in one-on-one matchups, and unfortunately for the Bengals, most of the time the offense won that matchup.
Yeah.
And they weren't able to secure the tackle when it was one-on-one, outside of a couple guys who, guys like Mike Hilton, who felt like they were pretty consistent in their tackling. But when you're relying on others who consistently, we're going to talk about James Betcher, this linebacking crew, and the number of missed tackles that they had this year, it just didn't bode well for them. And ultimately, they're going to have to make improvements from a personnel perspective and also from a scheme perspective.
Lou Anarumo, obviously the biggest name on the list, but not the only Bengals coach that got fired. D-line coach Marion Hobby, linebackers coach James Betcher, and O-line coach Frank Pollock also let go by the Bengals today. And this is overarching change about as big as I could expect. We've been in the camp for a while now that Zach Taylor wasn't going to be fired, regardless of how this season went. And they basically checked off every name of coaches I thought could be fired this offseason, and doing it within 24 hours of being eliminated. I think it signals big change for this offseason, and a big change in mindset for Bengals fans as we go into this offseason with how they might operate and how they might handle some of their funds and everything along those lines. But those other coaches that were eliminated, the one that jumps off the page quickest to me is James Betcher, the linebacker coach. Obviously, Frank Pollock, the second biggest name on that list, and we'll get to him momentarily. But Betcher took over for Al Golden after the Super Bowl year. Al Golden, the current defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, and a name that I would certainly be interested in, feeling out his interest in returning to the league. I think with Lou Anarumo being fired and that spot being open, I think the Bengals defensive coordinator job is very, very desirable. Al Golden has coached one of the best defenses in college football in Notre Dame, and with the familiarity with Zach Taylor, the coaching staff, the city, I assume he loved his time in Cincinnati. He was able to get to a Super Bowl, so maybe that's a name you go out and get. But to drop from a guy that we're now talking about potentially coming back and filling a defensive coordinator role at linebacker when Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Akeem Davis-Gaither were all playing at their peak, to where they're at now, where most of this season we're talking about potentially cutting a guy that's been a multi-time captain. Logan Wilson obviously injured down the stretch, but even had some questions about him earlier this year. Getting a new linebackers coach in here with the talent we all believe we have in that room, I think is monumental. It can really raise this defense the most possible out of any of these firings with just a simple coaching change.
Yeah, ultimately what we talked about is the lack of progression of those draft picks, right?
Correct.
You spend 8 of your 10 draft picks on defense, 8 of your top 100 draft picks on defense over the last several years, and they just weren't able to progress the way that you needed them to. And I look at this defensive line and the number of draft picks that they've made on that defensive line who have not panned out.
Yeah.
And, I think ultimately, yes, that linebacker crew, they probably have the most talent and have the ability to be elevated the most. But for me, the defensive line coach has the ability to make the biggest impact because of the amount of draft capital that's been spent on that
That's true.
position. And you look at guys who later on in this year, Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, who made strides and improvements as the year went on and started to look like maybe they could be rotational pieces in this defense moving on. For me, that defensive line coach is going to make an impact because they have that young talent ready to go versus a guy, like the linebacker coach where that talent is there and I think is already pretty close to being good enough NFL talent. I was actually a little surprised that James Betcher was let go. I talked a little bit about the secondary struggling this year, but for me, the defensive line coach is the one that has the ability to really make that impact in terms of young talent. And obviously what they decide to do opposite of Trey Hendrickson this offseason in terms of adding another edge rusher is also going to be a big piece for this because ultimately if you add a veteran edge rusher to be opposite Trey Hendrickson, and I realize that this isn't like true to the T here, but they can spend a lot more time worrying about the interior and focusing on getting some support from the interior and not having to spend so much time on the edge. Then this D-line coach can really kind of focus on what needs to be improved, and that's making the progressions with this young interior defensive line core that hopefully in 2025 will be a key piece to that defensive line.
We've talked a lot about this season and especially today with Lou's firing about whether or not it was scheme or personnel. And I think when you see the firings kind of ripple down throughout the roster, it's a little bit of throughout the coaching staff, it's a combination of both. We touched on the development problems. We touched on the scheme problems. I think firing all three of these coaches so quickly after the season indicates a pretty drastic change. I think we should expect the Bengals defense to look almost entirely different next year. And I'm not necessarily talking about the players out there. I'm talking about the scheme and the way they operate. We've talked time and time again about Lou Anarumo's defenses. Between the 20s, they're garbage. What you get in the red zone, it's bend, don't break. Well, maybe that changes this year. Maybe they're just good everywhere. I don't know. The scheme's definitely going to change with a new defensive coordinator and firing the other guys on the staff. It makes me think that maybe the Bengals are going to take a big swing. Because if you go out and get any of the big names to be a defensive coordinator, they usually have their guys they like to bring with them. I'm talking about the Dennis Allens, the Robert Salas, the Brandon Staley's. Heck, even the Al Goldens of the world probably have a couple of guys they want to bring with them in terms of their staff. So I think freeing up some of these position coach spots before you go to those interviews makes a job I think is incredibly desirable, even more desirable. We talked about it on Off the Bench. Justin Kinner posed the question, how desirable is this Bengals defensive coordinator job? I said my piece. I think it's one of the most desirable jobs in the history of the NFL for a defensive coordinator. I was just wondering where you stand, Craig.
Yeah, I put it in the chat during Off the Bench as well. I'm right there with you, Jacob.
Yeah.
I think the amount of success that this Bengals offense has had makes it so easy for a DC to come in here and ultimately put a stamp on a defense and make a quick improvement and potentially make a run to a Super Bowl that it'll be very interesting to me to see what the Bengals do here. And here's why I say that, right? So from my perspective, I agree with you 100%. I'd love to see the Bengals go out and hire somebody like Brandon Staley or Dennis Allen. But if I'm being completely honest, both of those guys, their future in the NFL is not as a head coach.
Right.
And for me, this position and this is going to work out in the Bengals' favor short term, but not long term, is that this Bengals defensive coordinator position has the ability to rocket you into a head coaching job within 2 years.
That's
if
true.
You do it well. Because all it takes is for you to be a mediocre defense, and this Bengals team becomes an instant Super Bowl contender. And so we looked at what Lou was able to do the 2 years when the Bengals made the run with the AFC Championship and the Super Bowl appearance. They were, 15th or 16th in the NFL in total defense. It doesn't take a top 10 defense for this Bengals team to become a Super Bowl contender. And so a defensive coordinator, someone like Robert Saleh, who is still expected to be a contender for head coaching jobs, this makes a ton of sense for him because it only is going to take him a year or two, get this defense to be sustainable, and then he goes and takes another head coaching job. Now, the tough part about that, obviously, is, okay, then what do the Bengals do?
Right.
The other side of it is there another young defensive assistant that you see being a head coach in the next 3 to 5 years that you can bring in as your D coordinator and isn't as established, but is one of those hot names, right? And I don't know which direction the Bengals will go here, but ultimately who they hire will determine what that future down the road looks like for this Bengals defense and whether or not they're part of that long-term solution. I think ultimately Brandon Staley and the failures that he had from clock management and team management probably don't bode well for his future as a head coach in the NFL.
No.
I think Brandon, you talked about Dennis Allen. He's now had 2 different head coaching stints, both of them lackluster at best. His future as an NFL head coach, probably not so much. And so if you hire one of those 2, they may be your defensive coordinator for as long as Zach Taylor is around. But if you go out and hire someone like Robert Saleh, you're only gonna be 2 to 3 years max, because quite frankly, if it doesn't work out, Zach Taylor will be gone after 2 to 3 years, and then
Right.
Robert Saleh will be looking for a job again anyway. So it'll be interesting to see which direction they go. All of the names that have been talked about make a ton of sense to me.
Yeah.
And all 4 of them that you've talked about make a ton of sense. It will be, there's no question about it, this will be the most sought after DC job out there. I know that there's a lot of names that people are expecting to get head coaching jobs. If some of those fall through and don't end up getting a job, I think Mike Vrabel's already penciled in as the Patriots head coach.
I would say.
But the truth of the matter is that if that's not true and our expectations and our read on the room is wrong, this is a perfect job for Mike Vrabel
Absolutely.
to come in and do the exact same thing. So, long story short, there's 2 pieces to it. You're going to have some head coaches who are available that are former defensive coordinators, and like you said, they're going to have their guys that they're going to be able to bring with them, plug in on the defensive line, plug in the linebacker coach room, and that takes care of itself. And so from Zach's perspective, he's already been tied to Dennis Allen. He apparently wanted to hire him in 2019 when he was hired. So I wouldn't be shocked if we went that direction, but I wouldn't say that Dennis Allen is my first choice.
What would be your first choice? Pick of the litter. Who's DC of the Bengals opening week next year?
Robert Saleh.
I like that.
And,
I like that.
I don't think it's even close for me. So here's why. First and foremost, I have a ton of respect for the other guys that have been thrown around. All 3 of those names, Al Golden, Dennis Allen, and Brandon, have all done very, very good jobs as defensive coordinators. What I'm looking for in my next defensive coordinator is someone who can be an assistant head coach.
Fair.
And ultimately, Zach Taylor has struggled, in my opinion, in situational awareness, in game management, and having a defensive coordinator next to him who can assist with that serves extremely beneficial. And respectfully, Dennis Allen and Brandon Staley
Absolutely not
had extreme struggles when it came to those same issues, right? So I look at someone like Robert Saleh as a great fit, not only as a defensive coordinator, but as an assistant head coach. And then you look at what the Jets defense did with Robert Saleh versus what they've done without Robert Saleh.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting. I mean, Jeff Ulbrich, who was the defensive coordinator, got promoted to interim head coach, and their defense absolutely tanked.
Yeah.
And so it just shows the value that Robert Saleh really brought to that defense, in my opinion, at least. They went from being a top 5 defense in the league through the first 6 weeks to dropping to like bottom 5.
Yeah.
And I think a big piece of that has to do with Robert Saleh. So Robert Saleh is far and away my number 1 choice. I just worry about whether or not he's actually going to be available as the DC. I wouldn't be shocked for another team to give him a head coaching job this cycle.
No, I certainly agree with that, and I think Saleh's probably the number 1 DC on the market if he does go that route. I don't think that's really that debatable. My only thing with that hire, and it's exactly what you just talked about, I think that's a stopgap, and you're still looking for your DC in a year or 2, because like you said, either Taylor's fired or Saleh does a good enough job that he's head coach somewhere else. Now, if those 2 or 3 years result in a championship, who cares if we're looking for another DC? It's fine by me. But it's the same conversation.
If Robert Saleh brings 2 assistants with him to coach the D-line and the linebackers, one of them may very well vault right into that. Again, you've got a very, very, very attractive job right now in all 3 of those positions, especially if you go get Robert Saleh. It allows you to recruit the best of the best at the D-line and the linebacker position, because Robert Saleh will be here no more than 3 years. So
True.
It automatically puts those 2 people right into position to take over as the defensive coordinator when Robert Saleh does in fact get that head coaching job that we hope he's able to get, because he leads the Bengals to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think I'd be pretty over the moon with any name that we've seen succeed as a defensive coordinator in the NFL. The only name that we haven't said so far that I would throw out there, I wouldn't be quite as excited as the other 3 ex-head coaches we've named, but would still be pretty thrilled with the hiring. Matt Eberflus, he was the DC in Indianapolis before he took the head coaching job with the Bears. The Bears, a top 10 defense with him as the head coach there, and then fell off the cliff this year and also last year during the first half when he gave up defensive play calling for the first time in his career. So whenever he's been at the helm of the defense, they've been a top 12 unit at least. This Eberflus I'm talking about. Not the same level as a Dennis Allen, Brandon Staley, Robert Saleh, but I would still be relatively excited with a Matt Eberflus hire. I know that name isn't the most beautiful name right now after how the time in Chicago ended, but I think he's right up there as well as one of the highly respected defensive names in the sport that got a head coaching job that didn't quite go his way. Obviously wouldn't help with the assistant head coach aspect of things. Really struggled with clock management and roster construction, everything along those lines. But in terms of just calling a defense, I think Matt Eberflus is a name we should consider as well.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I look at, the performance of this Bears defense, and they were fine. They weren't terrible, but ultimately, like we talked about, that's all you need, right? I mean, this defense doesn't have to be a top 10 defense. So Matt Eberflus, yeah, I think he had a ton of success as a defensive coordinator before. Doesn't really bring a whole lot as an assistant head coach, but certainly brings plenty as a defensive coordinator. The Bears defense, in terms of PFF grade, ranked 12th in the NFL this year. Certainly an attractive name. Doesn't overtake Robert Saleh for me, but
no shot.
So I guess the question becomes if you have to rank those 5 names that you've brought up that we've talked about, right? Allen, Staley, Saleh, Golden, and now Eberflus. Rank them 1 through 5.
I go Staley 1, and I know that wouldn't necessarily help with the assistant head coach, like you said, and that's a big piece for a lot of people, but I think he's the best defensive mind on the market. Saleh, with the quick turnaround to being a head coach, he would still be my 2. I'd be thrilled with him on this staff, but I just lean with the pieces we have, with how long we hope this window is. I would like the more sure long-term thing in terms of Brandon Staley or Dennis Allen. I would put Saleh right above Dennis Allen coming in at 3rd, and then Golden 4 and Eberflus 5, if I'm ranking those names.
Okay, I think we're on the same page. I would just flip-flop my top 2.
Yeah.
Staley is a clear number 2 to me. I think from my perspective, again, I gave my reasons for Saleh.
Yeah.
I think Brandon Staley is a clear number 2 for me. I think he is, like you said, probably one of, if not the best defensive minds out there. At least that'll be available. And I think he makes a ton of sense. It just worries me of his game management and roster management.
Absolutely.
And stuff. So, it totally makes sense. The rest I think we're in line with. I don't need to revisit there, but certainly makes sense. The other position we haven't really dug into a whole lot is Frank Pollock moving on, and he was at the end of his contract, so call it a firing, call it a non-renewal, whatever. He's not with the Bengals anymore, and it's 2 months before his contract was over, so he's fired. At this point, Frank Pollock never really clicked with this Bengals team. The offensive line has been a deficiency of this team for as long as Zach Taylor has been. And Frank Pollock was brought in as someone who was thought to be one of those great offensive line minds, and that he was going to be able to change the game and really make this offensive line into something that could protect your number 1 asset, and that's Joe Burrow. And it didn't work out. What are you looking for next from an offensive line coach? Obviously, I don't expect names because maybe you're different than me. I'm not familiar with the offensive line coach power rankings here. So let's just talk about just mentality and philosophy in terms of what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think the glass eater mentality clearly didn't work in Cincinnati, so let's change that a little bit. I want whoever's going to be the O-line coach and assumingly the run game coordinator as well. I think this goes right in line with the DC D-line linebacker coach talk, where you get to coach a position on the side of the ball with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and And hell, we've seen enough from Chase Brown. I'll throw him in the mix. You have a lot of really exciting pieces on offense. I think this is a pretty desirable position. Frank Pollock was towards the top of names when we hired him here. I think we'll continue to see this be a desirable position, any position on the Bengals coaching staff, as long as Joe Burrow's playing quarterback. I want an offensive line coach that is in hand with Zach Taylor or whoever's running the offense, and that's really the biggest thing. I always felt like a glass eater mentality for a team that's going to throw the ball 50 times a game just didn't necessarily line up. We need a line coach that's going to be able to marry his game with the Bengals game, because I hate to break it to you guys, we can ask for a balanced attack as long as we want, but if we're going to re-sign T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and pay Joe Burrow, we're paying Joe Burrow, this is going to be a throwing team, and they're going to continue to throw the ball. Maybe it doesn't have to be 50 times a game, but they'll always throw it more than they run it. So we need an O-line coach that's not only okay with that, but encourages that and can get these guys in the building and has a good job of recognizing talent and scouting both NFL guys and college guys to get more athleticism in this room. We need a guy that's going to change that mentality, because obviously Frank Pollock loves the big bodies, and we've had a lot of success with Mims and Orlando Brown when they've both been healthy, but on the interior, the lack of athleticism with Volson and Kappa have really come back to bite this team. I think that's another big change that the Bengals next offensive line coach will have to make too. Strike for athleticism. Go get guys who are football players, who are athletes, not just big bodies that can clog up the middle.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Bengals made a lot of investment in those big bodies, right?
Right.
You even look at the tackle position, where you now have two tackles that are standing at 6'8", 360 pounds, or whatever the Browns stand at. They very clearly valued large bodies, and unfortunately in today's NFL, that's not necessarily always the best. And like you said, this Bengals team is always going to be one that passes and is pass first. And as much as we complain and want to see more balance from this offense, we saw that a little bit from Chase Brown late in the season, but ultimately Joe Burrow is your number one asset, and that's the position that you have to protect the most. And so for me, I'm looking for someone with that experience in a pass-heavy offense. I looked at some of the names out there, both from assistant O-line coaches, but also O-line coaches that were fired as part of head coaching changes and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, a majority of them right now are focused on run-first offenses and balanced attacks. And so I'm going to be open to seeing what the Bengals do here. This O-line coach is going to be one that I'm actually going to be a little bit more flexible with, in terms of it not necessarily being one of those established names.
100%.
I look at teams like the Detroit Lions and their mentality and physicality and athleticism that they bring, and what they're able to do offensively, both in terms of the pass and the rush. I look at teams like the Bills and what they've been able to do offensively. And obviously this year was very run heavy, but historically they've been relying on Josh Allen a lot. The Green Bay Packers throw the ball a lot. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers throw the ball a lot. Are there guys on that staff outside of the actual O-line coach that make sense, that have been in the league long enough, that are ready to make that step, or that maybe took reduced roles with those teams to be able to try and go after a Super Bowl or something? So I'm going to be patient with this one. I don't have specific names to throw out to you, but ultimately when we do get that O-line hire, what I'm going to be looking for is exactly what you talked about: experience in the passing game, and also development of young players. You look at some of the young stars on the offensive line around the league. Their experience with developing those young guys is going to be huge, because ultimately this Bengals team is going to be relying on drafting a couple O-line here soon. And Marius Mims as well has shown a lot of promise, and this next O-line coach is going to have to take a lot of responsibility with continuing to develop that group.
I think that might be the biggest thing for every single one of these openings, is how are you going to develop not only the guys we have here, but the other young guys we're planning on getting. When you have money locked up in Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase at the level that we're expecting them to, you're going to have to hit in the draft. And if you don't hit, you're going to have to be able to develop those guys to a place where they can play a role that has some benefit to the team. And the Bengals have not had an ability to do that, and that's why you see 4 coaches fired less than 24 hours after the season ends. It's January 6th, and we already have massive changes for this Bengals team going into 2025. Hopefully, we got a jam-packed offseason coming up.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a lot of Chatterbox Bengals shows
Yeah,
this offseason, I think. It'll be interesting to see. I'm excited for it, and like I said at the top of the show, this is a big opportunity, right? This Bengals team is primed
absolutely.
to be a top team in the NFL for years to come, with the young talent that they have around this team, and between the coaching hires that have to be made, the free agency that hopefully they attack full bore, and of course the draft and the opportunity that they have to address key concerns on both sides of the ball, especially in the trenches, uh, is going to provide for a lot of really exciting conversation and
Hopefully.
ultimate. Well, whether they make the moves that are exciting or we just
That's
bash
fair.
them for not making
That's
the moves that are
fair.
exciting, there will be good content, Jacob.
That's true.
So it's going to be an exciting offseason nonetheless, and I'm looking forward to it, and certainly hope that more shows are related to positive moves than lack of moves. But
That's right.
hopefully we can avoid the Reds content
Oh,
where
man.
we're doing shows about rumors instead of shows about actual successful signings and trades.
That's right. That's right. That's the goal, and this is certainly a good start to getting out of the bungles and going back into the full-on Bengals. Let's make some wins like we have a franchise quarterback, like we can, or make some moves like we have a franchise quarterback, like we have a team that could compete for a Super Bowl. And this is the start. You got to get out of the organizational norms that we've had if we want to be able to compete with where we're at right now, and we're certainly headed that direction. We'll have a lot more to monitor this offseason, but 3 straight days of Chatterbox Bengals is not enough. We got a 4th coming up tomorrow, our final regular season show, Tuesday night. It'll be normal time. We'll break down the film from the Bengals win over the Steelers tomorrow night. Excited to see you all there as we wrap up the regular season. But first off-season episode of Chatterbox Bengals in the books. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Hoo day, everybody.